What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I want to talk about Doctor Strange. This movie came out 10 years ago, this August actually. I do remember seeing it in theaters, and it was a lot of fun, so I'm excited to talk about it now. There will be spoilers for this movie, of course, but this film is kind of a standalone from a lot of the MCU, so I'm only going to say minor spoilers for any of the movies that came before this film. In case you forgot, I have a list of them up here on screen, so if you haven't seen those films and don't want even minor spoilers for them, get out now. Right, so with Doctor Strange, I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't really like it that much. I had fun, I enjoyed watching the movie, but I don't remember thinking it was amazing. This was for a couple of reasons, which I'll get into in a second, but now that it's been 10 years, I can happily say this film has only gotten better with age. I really think it's a solid film on the MCU's part that gets overlooked by the other excellent films that were coming out around the same time. And that was part of my problem. I had grown used to the quality of Captain America 2, Avengers Age of Ultron, Captain America 3, and Guardians of the Galaxy, and so when this movie came out, it just wasn't as good as those films, so I didn't like it as much, which is kind of unfair to this film. And now, 10 years later, when I'm viewing it away from that context, I like it a lot more. Nevertheless, I did still have my issues with this film in the past, and I want to talk about them today. So, the way I'm going to review this movie, I think I'm going to go through each of the issues I had with the film and explain why they aren't really issues anymore. Well, there's at least one that's still an issue, but that's beside the point. Using the lens of my past criticisms will be a fun way, for me at least, to examine this movie. And I think in so doing, I will comprehensively review this film. If there is anything I missed, I'll be sure to cover it at the end of the review, though. So, up on screen are my 6 past issues that I took with this film. Most of them are no longer issues, so just wait till we get to talking about them. But let's jump into number 1. So, first, at the time, I was feeling the pressure of the general Marvel criticism. When Doctor Strange came out, the MCU proved that it could sustain itself, that Avengers 1 and Iron Man 1 weren't just a fluke, that they could tell more stories in this shared universe that people liked and that were really good. Captain America 2, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers 2, and Civil War had all come out before this film, all of which are excellent movies in my opinion. And so whenever something is successful, people love to criticize it and look for the imperfections. And all that peer pressure got to me. And look, I'm not saying don't be critical. I'm a critic after all. And I'm also not saying that the MCU is perfect, but I do like the MCU, and I think it's impressive what they were able to accomplish, especially in the first 3 phases. And while the last couple of phases haven't been great, I think we are on an upward trend. Regardless, the thing with Doctor Strange is that in many ways it feels like a paint-by-numbers origin story, at least for the MCU. Yes, there were some highlights and key differences between Doctor Strange and other films, most notably its final conclusion, but it was a fairly standard film. So, in a well-meaning effort to be truly critical at the time, I chose not to like Doctor Strange as much, to give in to that peer pressure of Marvel criticism, and that in turn hurt my enjoyment of the film. Because now that it's been 10 years and I no longer watch the movie within the context of the MCU Phase 3, I see how good of a film it actually is and how much I do like it. It may not be a superhero masterpiece like Captain America 2 or Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's still a good movie. So that's why and perhaps how I overcame this issue. The next issue I took with the film was specifically the bad villain. A lot of the arguments against the MCU are that their villains are weak. It still is an issue. And unfortunately, Kaecilius, the main villain of this film, really doesn't do much to change this. He does have one good scene where he gets to monologue to Doctor Strange about time and why time is the true enemy. It's good and well performed, or at least as well performed as it can be, but the rest of the film, he's kind of just a mustache-twirly villain that does evil things for the sake of being evil. And honestly, this is still an issue of the film. It's sad that they wasted the acting potential of Mads Mikkelsen on such a forgettable villain. But again, his monologue is good, his costume design and look is cool. I really like the burned out eyes with the purple crystals around that. That looks really cool. But I just don't think this character did anything to elevate itself above the myriad of other meh villains in the MCU, you know? Another issue I had with this film at time I first watched it, and this might have been due to my young age at the time of watching it, and that was the fact that the Ancient One and Baron Mordo kept going back and forth about their opinions on Doctor Strange. Like, Mordo is introduced to us by saving Doctor Strange in an alley and then saying that maybe he could be of benefit to the mystic arts. Then Strange manipulates time and Mordo is like, you shouldn't be doing that. Then Strange questions the Ancient One and Mordo's like, don't question her, she's amazing. And then when Mordo realizes the truth about the Ancient One and that Strange was telling the truth, he turns on everyone. He's just like, I hate all magicians. It makes sense now, and I feel like the character is a solid setup for a future villain, but at the time he kind of confused me. The Ancient One, I feel like, is a little worse. When she first meets Doctor Strange, she humors him, then sends him on a magic trip through dimensions, then kicks him out to teach him humility, I guess, and it seemingly takes Mordo to speak up on Strange's behalf to convince her to train Doctor Strange. And then, suddenly, she's all for training Doctor Strange, and she helps him learn a lot of spells very fast. But then, when he goes too fast, she's bothered, and then when Doctor Strange confronts her about pulling an energy from the dark dimension, she gets all testy and angry. Again, it makes sense now. I can see the through line of her character, but because the movie didn't spell it out for me, and my young brain at the time, I didn't fully understand the characterization, and I didn't fully appreciate the movie. This is also true of her ending monologue to Doctor Strange, where she tells him it's not about him, that he needs to think outside of himself. That monologue was layered with subtext that I didn't get when I first watched the film, and now that I can get it now, in my older age, I appreciate it so much more. So now, I no longer take issue with the characterization of Baron Mordo or the Ancient One. I think they're both actually rather well designed, well written, and certainly very well acted characters. And so at this point, I'm actually grateful the film didn't hold my hand and explain every last motivation behind the characters, but rather treated me and the audience as smart human individuals and trusted us to understand why the characters did what they did. Plus, the fact that the Ancient One was probably using the Time Stone to examine a number of different possibilities with Doctor Strange can explain a lot of her back and forth nature. She acted and responded in a lot of these back and forth ways based off of what she knew Doctor Strange needed to hear for the future. I bet if she just started training Doctor Strange immediately after he said, teach me, instead of kicking him out, he wouldn't have learned humility, or at least not the needed humility at the time, and it would have been worse for him. Moving on, my next issue is more personal to me, and I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with it, but I didn't like the lack of a climactic battle at the end. Doctor Strange's time loop is the thing that sets this film apart, I get it, but it did bother me a bit. However, on my next rewatch of the film, a few months later when we got it on DVD, I realized that they actually did have a climactic battle. Mordo and Strange had to fight Caecilius and his followers while the city was putting itself back together. Doctor Strange does the reverse time trick using the time stone, and while everything is going in reverse, he and Mordo have to fight Caecilius and his zealots. It works really well. So yeah, this really isn't an issue, and as I recall, this was the biggest thing that everyone praised about the film, was that it didn't end in the way that they were expecting. We were all expecting a CGI magic fight between all the magicians, and of course Doctor Strange would find a way to punch harder than the other guys. Yay. But instead, it wasn't that. Instead, Doctor Strange actually used a clever time loop trick to trap Dormammu and win the day. And I agree with everyone else at this point. I really like the time loop trick. I did like it the first time I watched it, but I also wanted to have my cool magic fight. It's just now I can appreciate that the whole movie because I realized that there was a cool magic fight and a cool time loop trick. The fifth issue I took with this film 10 years ago after I just watched it was the fact that I personally wanted this movie to be a celebration of the MCU. Let me explain. I think it would have been really cool if Doctor Strange took place across the entirety of the MCU up to this point. And here's where the minor spoilers for the previous MCU's films come in. The first scene with Doctor Strange, when he's being a surgeon and doing his awesome surgeon duties, you could see like a news article for Iron Man. And then maybe after he loses his hands, we see on TV during one of the numerous operations that New York is being attacked by an alien invasion from Avengers 1. And then maybe after he gets to Kathmandu and visits Kamar-Taj, he sees a newspaper article for Avengers 2 and the Sokovia incident. And maybe while he's training with the Ancient One, we see a story about Civil War and the airport battle. It didn't have to be these specific scenes and events, but I do think it would have been cool for Doctor Strange to be this celebration of the MCU, showing off how a normal person like Doctor Strange was initially experienced the MCU from a different perspective. Truth be told, though, Doctor Strange really isn't a story about a normal person learning about magic and monsters. There's a little bit of that, certainly, but Doctor Strange was always an excellent surgeon, the top of his field. But more than that, he was always destined to be one of the biggest players in the MCU, not a street-level fighter. He was never going to be just a normal dude. I do appreciate that this movie had him stop for a second and be like, oh my goodness, magic is crazy and wild, but then he just took it in stride and learned it and mastered it. So, having all these Easter eggs to other MCU films and stuff really wouldn't have served the story because that's not the story they were trying to tell. And if it's not serving the story, then, well, you probably shouldn't do it. The few Easter eggs they do have to the Avengers and wider MCU universe are great and good, but we don't need a whole ton because that would just bog down the movie and confuse the casual viewers. But there is another benefit to having this movie be a celebration of the MCU, one that does serve the story, and that is the time factor. It would have been cool to see that Doctor Strange's training took place over the course of multiple years, over the course of multiple major MCU events, rather than an undetermined amount of time. The best answer I could find online is that canonically, his training took anywhere from 3 to 9 months, and then he's fighting Caecilius and others who studied for years. So if he had also studied for years, I would have found it more believable, and it would have been a cool way to show off and celebrate the MCU to boot. To the movie's credit, they do show Doctor Strange being an exceptionally fast study at magic. It comes naturally to him. He's studying even when he's asleep, in his astral form, which allows him to maximize the time he has. And on top of all that, it's revealed that he has a photographic memory, so yeah, he can learn faster than other people. And look, I'm fine with all of those explanations, and as a lover of superhero movies, I have seen it time and time again, where the hero or villain does not have that much time to train with the superpower, and yet they are on equal footing in the final battle of the movie. I get it. So, in summary, this really isn't an issue. I don't need Doctor Strange to be a celebration of the MCU. Ultimately, we have Avengers Endgame for that. It was just something that I was hoping for at the time, and it didn't happen. My expectations weren't met, but then again, the movie didn't know it needed to fulfill those expectations, right? And this is why it's always really good idea to watch movies twice, so that way you know what to expect the second time, and you usually end up enjoying the movie more because of it, because you know what you're getting into. Lastly, my final issue that I had with the film at the time was that the crazy visuals of New York turning in on itself and all the buildings, warping around and moving in this crazy MC Escher-esque way was really cool. But at the time, I remember thinking that they're just trying to copy Inception, which maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but ultimately, who cares? The visuals of Inception turning cities upside down were cool, and the visuals in Doctor Strange of a city being turned upside down are also cool. It's not bad to have more of a good thing. It wasn't overdone, and more importantly, I think it worked really well within the plot of Doctor Strange. The visuals helped tell the story. So it's not that big of an issue, but I do remember thinking that it was an issue at the time because they were just copying from Inception. And to be fair, it was not a straight copy. They did it very uniquely where they made cubes in space of New York City. It was really weird and cool and fun all at the same time. So it was distinct and different from Inception, but it bothered me at the time. Now it doesn't bother me. I just love that we have both Inception and Doctor Strange where I can see cities turning in on themselves. Very, very cool. But those were the 6 issues I took with the film when I originally watched it. Most of them aren't really issues anymore. Most of them I've gotten over. The one that I haven't is the fact that the movie's villain is still quite weak. I really wish Caecilius could have been developed a bit more. But in favor of developing Doctor Strange, developing his relationship with Mordo, and developing the Ancient One, I'm okay with Caecilius getting left by the wayside. I mean, not for nothing, but Black Panther was able to develop just as many characters and have a really cool villain, but I digress. To be fair, Black Panther is one of the best movies ever made, period. So, what's Doctor Strange to do to compete with that? There is a new criticism I have, and that is the time factor for the villains, because the opening scene of the movie is really smart. Instead of starting with Doctor Strange, they start with the magicians. It's this cool action scene between Caecilius and his zealot followers versus the Ancient Ones. It works really well to draw us into the action before we slow down with Doctor Strange's comparatively boring life. However, it does set up this false sense of time that throughout all of Doctor Strange's many procedures and all of his training, they're just sitting on this spell they tore out of a book to draw power from the Dark Dimension and doing nothing about it. To the movie's credit, we don't know how long it takes to cast that spell, or if there are any special ingredients or materials needed in order to cast it, so presumably it may have taken Caecilius and his followers a long time to do it. And furthermore, assuming that this is a non-linear story, it is possible that Doctor Strange's accident and all the procedures to save him happened while Caecilius was still an upstanding member of Kamar-Taj, and right before Doctor Strange gets to Kamar-Taj is when Caecilius made his attack on the library, ran off with the spell. However, the movie makes no attempt to explain either of those two things, so it's left ambiguous. Again, I'm a fan of superhero movies. I know that many times the villain's goals are hampered simply because the plot says that the hero needs enough time to train or learn their superpowers or whatever, but it still bothers me. However, I want to end on a positive note, and that's really easy because this movie is fantastic. I want to say that the magic system, which is part of the setting, is absolutely fantastic. They do such a good job showcasing the magic. They give you just enough exposition to understand what's going on, but not so much that it slows down the movie. One of my favorite examples are these orange fan blade shield thingies. They are never explained because they don't need to be. Visually, you get it. They're shields, they can protect you from magical attacks. They're also weapons that can be thrown like blades or used in hand-to-hand combat. But a lesser movie would have stopped to explain this to Doctor Strange. And it's not like they don't do exposition. Baron Mordo takes a second to explain what a relic is, but notice that in that same scene, Doctor Strange conjures this magical whip as a weapon to protect himself, and that's never explained, the whip that is. Again, visually we get it. It's a magical energy between Doctor Strange and his hands. He can use it like a whip, he can use it like a rope. No further explanation needed. But I'm really impressed by the movie's ability to surgically choose when to exposit and when to show. Because despite that old adage of show don't tell, there are instances when telling is the most effective and efficient way to convey a story. And Doctor Strange knew this, and that movie mastered that balance of exposition versus showing. Another example of the magic system is the way they use the dark dimension, because instead of just saying that the Ancient One is so powerful she can slow time for herself, they instead say no, she draws power from the dark dimension, which has a connection to time. I mean, that's why Caecilius devoted himself to Dormammu, so that he could live forever, just like the Ancient One. So I love that through line, rather than coming up with three separate things. The Ancient One's long life, Caecilius' motivations, and the big bad evil guy, they were able to link them all together by using the dark dimension. And furthermore, this gave Caecilius and Baron Mordo major trust issues because they learn that the Ancient One is a hypocrite. In fact, that's the first word of the movie. Caecilius yells hypocrite when he sees the Ancient One for the first time, because, unbeknownst to us, she has the glowing purple tattoo underneath her hood. And what I love about all of this is that the opening scene keeps the Ancient One's face hidden so that we, the audience, don't see the glowing purple tattoo on her forehead. It's fantastic. When I first watched the movie, I thought they were keeping her face hidden just to make the scene more visually dynamic and engaging. You know, shroud her in this air of mystery and to show how cool she is. Like, she can nonchalantly beat up all these guys, and to prove it, she keeps her hood on. And it works because she's awesome. The scene does do all of that. That is a big reason why they chose to go in that direction, but also, by keeping her hood up, this scene aids the plot because it keeps her purple tattoo hidden. It waits to reveal that to us, the audience, until the proper time in the movie, and that's just brilliant. So, in summary, I really like Doctor Strange, the movie. I know I didn't get too deep into the characters. Maybe I'll do that another day, but I do like the characters in this movie. Doctor Strange and the Ancient One are fantastic. Baron Mordo has a great friendship with Strange, but it is then set up for an excellent villain arc, and unfortunately goes nowhere in future movies, but I'll make a video about that soon. Christine was a solid love interest for Doctor Strange. I love how they bring her back into the movie when she saves Steven and then attempts to save the Ancient One. Caecilius was a meh villain, but at least he looked cool. The burned out purple eyes was awesome. Again, I will repeat that. It is very cool. And lastly, Wong was wonderful comic relief. I loved Wong. But outside of the characters, I really enjoyed the plot of this movie. It was fun and an engaging origin story for Doctor Strange with a few good twists to separate it from the rest of the origin stories of the MCU. So overall, love Doctor Strange. Great movie. Especially 10 years later, I think it's one of the best the MCU has to offer. Maybe not as good as Captain America 2 or Black Panther or Avengers Infinity War, but it's still really good. Anywho, what are your thoughts? Do you guys like Doctor Strange, hate it, or somewhere in between? Tell me down below.